You are working more than before, and somehow it still does not feel like enough you earn. You try to save, you try to stay disciplined, and still the feeling does not change. And that is the part that is difficult to explain, because when you look at your life from the outside, nothing appears obviously broken. Your income exists, your routine is stable, your effort is real. And yet there is this constant sense that you are not moving forward, that you are maintaining, but not progressing. And over time, that feeling becomes heavier because it does not come from one clear problem. It comes from a pattern that is difficult to see at first, because the way income behaves today is very different from what most people were taught to expect. For a long time, the idea was simple: you work, you earn, you improve, and gradually your situation becomes more stable, more predictable, more secure. But now something feels off, because even when income increases, the pressure does not disappear, it just changes form. And that creates a kind of confusion, because the usual solutions do not seem to work. You try to be more disciplined. You try to manage money better, you try to work harder, and still the outcome does not match the effort. And this is where people start questioning themselves, because it feels like a personal failure, but the reality is more structural than personal, because the system that defines how income works has quietly changed without clearly announcing that change. Jobs still exist, salaries still come in. And from the outside, everything looks normal, but underneath that surface, the relationship between effort and outcome has become less reliable. And that is where the instability begins, not in a dramatic, visible way, but in small adjustments that accumulate over time. Expectations increase, workloads expand, costs rise faster than income, and suddenly the same amount of effort produces less stability than it used to, and that shift is subtle enough that it does not immediately feel like crisis. But it is enough to create constant pressure, because you're always trying to catch up to a moving baseline. And that baseline keeps shifting in ways that are difficult to predict, which means you can be consistent without feeling secure, you can be responsible without feeling in control, and you can be productive without feeling like you are getting ahead. And this creates a very specific kind of stress, the kind that does not come from sudden failure, but from prolonged stagnation where nothing collapses, but nothing meaningfully improves either. And stagnation is harder to react to because it does not force immediate action. It just slowly changes how you experience your own progress. You start measuring time differently. You notice that months pass without real improvement. You realize that small gains are canceled out by rising costs. And over time, that creates a sense of being stuck, even when you are technically stable. And this is where the misunderstanding becomes dangerous, because stability is no longer the same as progress. You can be stable and still be losing ground in slow ways that are not immediately visible. And once that happens, the usual advice stops working, because it is built on an older version of how income used to behave, where effort had a more predictable return, and where consistency led to accumulation. But now consistency often leads to maintenance instead of growth, and maintenance requires constant effort just to stay in place, which means the system is no longer pushing you forward. It is requiring you to push just to avoid falling behind. And that is why the experience feels exhausting, because there is no clear finish line. There is only continuous adjustment. And the more you try to stabilize your position, the more you realize that stability itself is temporary, because it depends on factors that are constantly changing and mostly outside your control. And this is where the feeling of not getting ahead starts to make sense, because it is not that you are failing, it is that the environment you are operating in does not guarantee forward movement anymore. It only guarantees participation. And participation is not the same as progress. And once you see that clearly, another layer of the problem becomes visible, because if income itself behaves unpredictably, then planning becomes harder, saving becomes less effective and long-term. Decisions become more uncertain because they are based on assumptions that may not hold in the future, and that uncertainty feeds back into daily life in subtle ways. It changes how you think about spending, it changes how you think about risk, it changes how you think about time, and gradually it creates a background level of anxiety that does not go away because it is not tied to a single event. is tied to a system that is continuously shifting, and that is why so many people feel like they're doing everything right, but still not getting the results they expected because the rules they are following are based on a version of stability that no longer exists in them. Same way, and once that disconnect becomes clear, the frustration starts to feel more rational, because it is not coming from nowhere, it is coming from trying to apply stable logic in an unstable structure, and the uncomfortable part is that this does not resolve easily because it is not caused by one factor that can be fixed. It is created by multiple moving parts that interact with each other in ways that are difficult to control, which means the feeling of being stuck is not temporary. For many people, it becomes a normal state. And when something becomes normal, it is harder to question because it feels like that is just how things are. And that is where most people stop looking deeper. They accept the pressure, they adjust their expectations, and they continue operating within the same system, hoping that more effort will eventually create change. But the pattern suggests otherwise, because if more effort was enough, the feeling would have disappeared by now, and the fact that it has not points to something more fundamental, which is that the relationship between work and stability has been redefined in a way that is not immediately obvious. And once you recognize that, it changes how you interpret your own situation. Because instead of asking why you're not getting ahead, you start asking whether the system you are in is designed to let you get ahead in the first place. And that question leads directly into the next issue that is becoming harder to ignore. Income itself is no longer predictable in the way people assume it is.